Hello guys, welcome back again to my YouTube channel. My name is Abiola, and in today's tutorial we're creating this classy and elegant dress. It is a dress you can wear to a lot of places. Okay, you can dress it up, you can dress it down, and it will still look good. It can also be styled as off the shoulder. So without wasting time, let's dive into the tutorial proper. Guys, the first thing you need to do is to bring out your pattern paper and fold it into two. We are not supposed to draft the skirt on pattern paper, we're supposed to draft it directly on fabric, but because of the slit, I want everyone to understand properly, so we're going to be drafting on pattern paper. At the time of filming this tutorial, I didn't have enough paper, so I drafted first on a single paper before transferring to this paper, in case you're wondering. Okay, so let's draft. The first thing I'm going to do is to mark 0.5 inch seam allowance at the top of this skirt, and this 0.5 inch seam allowance is what I'm going to join the skirt to the bodice, okay, or to the half cut, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to go ahead to rule that into a straight line. The next step is to mark your waist to the widest part of your hip, which is your hip point. Mine is 10 inches, so I went ahead to mark 10 inches, and I went ahead to connect the point into a straight line, and I labeled that hip point. The next step is to measure the length of the skirt part of this dress, and it measures 39 inches. I'll proceed to connect the point and also label that point the skirt length. I'm going to go ahead now to add more paper because we'll have to add our hemming allowance. Okay, so what I'm going to do at this point now is to add extra 2 inches as my hemming allowance. Okay, so I added 2 inches as my hemming allowance. I'll connect the point and also label. On the waistline, I'm going to divide my waist circumference by 4. My waist is 30. 30 divided by 4 gives me 7.5. So I marked 7.5 at that point. I'll proceed to add an extra inch for that and an extra inch for allowance. So I marked 1 inch for my dart and 1 more inch for allowance. Please pardon the lighting, it will all correct itself soon. Okay, then on the hip line, I divided my hip circumference by 4. My hip circumference is 43 inches. 43 divided by 4 gives me 10.75, which is what I marked, and I added extra 1 inch for my seam allowance. I'll proceed to connect the points. I'll make the top part straight, then I would use my curved ruler, the straightest part of the curved ruler, to connect. The next step is to go ahead and mark the knee line. This implies the waist to the knee, and mine is 21.5 inches. I'm going to mark that again in order to get a straight line, and I'll connect the point and label. I'm going to measure what I have on my hip point without adding the allowance at all, which is 10.75, or you can simply divide your hip circumference by 4. Mine is 43 divided by 4, which is 10.75, and I would go ahead to mark that. So I gave you two options. You either measure what you have on your hip point without the allowance and mark, or just go ahead and divide your hip circumference by 4 to save yourself the stress. Okay, on the skirt length line, I'm going to measure what I have on my knee line and mark exactly what I have there on the skirt length line as well as the allowance line, which is 10.75, or simply divide your hip circumference by 4 again, as simple as ABC. I'm going to proceed to connect from the knee line to the allowance line, and I'm going to cut out. For the back pattern, you do not need the paper to be on fold. The first thing I'm going to do after getting this fresh pattern paper is to mark my zipper allowance, and what I'm going to be marking is 2 inches from beginning to the end. After which, I'll proceed to connect the point into a straight line. Then I'll go ahead to place the front pattern on top of that line and pin it down so that it doesn't move around whilst cutting. After doing that, I'm going to go ahead to lengthen all the lines so that they appear on the back pattern. This is very important. Okay, so after doing all of that, on the waistline, I'm going to take 1 inch. On the hip point line, I'm going to mark 1.5 inch, and I'm going to connect that with the straightest part of my curved ruler. After connecting, I'm going to come down from the hip point by 5 inches and connect that into a straight line. On that line, I'm going to mark 1 inch and I'm going to connect from that hip point area to that point using the straightest part of the curve driller again. On the knee line, I'm going to lengthen that line as well. I'm going to mark 1 inch on the knee line, okay, and I'm going to go ahead to connect that to the knee line, and on the skirt length line I'm going to also lengthen the lines as well and mark 1 inch at that point and use my ruler to connect the points together. I'm going to go ahead now to label the zipper allowance, after which I'll proceed to cut out. So guys, if you remember what I said at the beginning of this video, I drafted my front skirt pattern as a one piece, not on fold, but I explained that I did not have enough paper at that time. Now that I have enough paper, I am going to place that front pattern on the folded paper to just cut it out. It's just as easy as that. But before I do that, on the front skirt pattern at the waistline, I'm going to go down by 0.5 inch. This is something I do for all my skirts. This will just give the skirt a bit of fit, like more fit. It will make the skirt more fitted. So I'm going to go down by 0.5 inches and I'll go in with my curve driller, the straightest part of the curve driller, to connect from that waistline to the side seam, just like you see me doing. Then I'll proceed to cut out. To ensure that the pattern paper doesn't move too much, I'll pin it down and proceed to cut. After cutting, I'm going to go ahead to label the front pattern, after which I would mark my dart. Your dart is obtained by dividing your bust span or your nipple to nipple by 2. My bust span is 7 divided by 2 gives me 3.5. That is what I went ahead to mark. I'm going to go ahead to mark that 3.5 from beginning to the end in order to obtain my dart line, and I'll proceed to connect the lines. Okay, after connecting the lines, I'll go ahead to flip the pattern paper to the other side and also mark that 3.5. But on this edge, we're going to actually mark our darts on this side of the dress. So I am going to connect the point and draw it into a straight line. The length of this dart is 5 inches. The length of this line is 5 inches, and on each side of the line I am going to take 0.5 inches on each side of the line. That implies that we took a 1 inch dart, and I'm going to connect to that point. That is how you mark your dart basically. Okay, I'll proceed now to open the paper and I'm going to slash through this point from beginning to the end. After slashing, I'm going to add 0.5 inches at this point while cutting. Please, not 1.5 inches, 0.5 inches whilst cutting. You can actually add up to 1.5 inches depending on you, but what I'll be adding at that point is 0.5. Now let's go to the bodice. In the cutting of the bodice, the first thing you need to do is to cut out the fabric you need. What I did was to place this fabric on fold and then cut out what I need. To know exactly what to cut out and to know exactly what you need to divide your bust circumference by 4 plus 1 inch seam allowance. My bust circumference is 38. 38 divided by 4 is 9.5. 9.5 plus 1 inch seam allowance gives me 10.5. What I have there is 11 inches, which is more than enough. For the length of the bodice, this is an off shoulder, which implies that you have to take some part of the off shoulder, like you have to take some part of the shoulder off. So for me, I was contemplating using between 5.5 to 6 inches, but I decided to later go with 6 inches. So know what you need for the length. Place your 6 inches at the beginning of the top, or 5 or 7, whatever you're using. For me, I'm using 6. Then proceed to mark your waistline. My waistline is 16.5. Then plus 0.5 inch allowance for joining the bodice to the skirt part. What I need there is 17 inches and I have more than enough. So that is how to determine what you would need. So now let's go ahead and mark. The first thing I'm going to mark is my shoulder to my bust point, which is 10 inches. I'm going to mark that and draw that into a straight line, after which I'll go ahead to mark my waistline. My waistline is 16.5. I'm going to mark that point and also mark 17, that's half inch, for joining the top to the skirt part, and I'll connect them into a straight line. After which I'll proceed to cut off the part I do not need. At this point, I'm going to introduce the back part of the bodice. So I'm going to also place it on fold. This bodice is going to be wider than the front pattern by 1.5 inches. That is, what you're cutting here should be about 12.5 to 13 inches. So what I'm going to do first is to mark out that 1.5 inches from beginning to the end. After connecting the points, I'll go ahead to place the front bodice pattern on top of this back bodice pattern. The front bodice pattern should be placed directly where the zipper allowance starts from. The next step is to divide my shoulder width by 2. My shoulder width is 15 inches. 15 inches divided by 2 gives me 7.5 inches. But we're not going to mark the 7.5 inches. We're going to subtract about 1.5 to 2 inches. Guys, I subtracted 1.5 inches and I marked 6 inches. But I wish I just marked 5.5. That is, I wished I subtracted 2 inches because I still had to hold in some part of the shoulder later on. So just subtract 2 inches and mark 5.5 inches so that the shoulder area is well fitted. The next step is to mark my armhole line. My armhole line is gotten by dividing my bust circumference by 6 plus 1.5 inches. That gives me 8 inches, like approximately 8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead now to mark that 8 inches and connect that into a straight line. After rolling that out, the next step is to divide my bust circumference by 4. 38 divided by 4 gives me 9.5. So I'm going to measure 9.5 at this point and mark it out. Then I'm going to go ahead to connect from that point to the shoulder. You can use your curved ruler or your straight ruler. I illustrated the two of them here, but I'm going to be working with the curved one for this video. You can use any one. Okay, I will now add my 1 inch seam allowance at that point. Then on the waistline, I'll divide my waist circumference by 4. 30 divided by 4 gives me 7.5. On the allowance line, I'll mark 7.5, and on the waistline, I'll also mark that 7.5. okay, after which I'm going to go ahead to add 1 extra inch for that and 1 inch for my seam allowance, and I'm going to connect from the waistline to the armhole area. After that, the next step is to extend all the lines towards the zipper area. Okay, so we are going to get rid of zipper bulge on our waistline, so we're going to take away 0.5 inch from that 1.5 that we marked. So we're going to go ahead to mark 1 inch. This is going to help us get rid of zipper bulge, after which we're going to go ahead to connect from the top to that point. We're going to connect with our ruler basically. The next step is to go ahead and cut out as shown. Okay, just proceed to cut out like you see me doing. After cutting out, we're going to proceed to work on our sweetheart neckline. On the front pattern, I'm going to come down by 1 inch from this point, because after turning with my facing, and I want it to land at 1.5 inch. So what I marked there is 1 inch. Then I'm going to use my free hand to connect from the shoulder area to the neckline. Okay, then I'm going to use my scissors to cut it out. You can go deeper than this, so you can go deeper by 1.5 by 2 inches, but that's just my preference. For the back, you can also decide to give it any shape you like. You can come this way, you can even go down, you can open your back. But I want to be able to wear bra with this dress, so I'm not going to go too deep. I'm just going to keep it simple and nice. So I'm going to come down from that point by 2 inches, and I'm going to go ahead to use my curved ruler to connect it. After connecting it, I'm going to proceed to cut out as shown. Guys, I do not want to join both the cutting and the sewing part, because this video is going to be too long and I do not want that. So in our next tutorial, you'll see how I joined everything to achieve this dress. So stay tuned, hit the subscribe button if you haven't. If you enjoyed watching this one, hit the like button so that I know that you enjoyed it. Okay, so see you in my next tutorial. Bye.